My name is Sheryl. I'm 33 years old. And this is the story of how my parents excluded me from my own brother's wedding, and how I cut them off so completely, they didn't even recognize their own dependence until it was too late. It all started with a knock on my door. I had just finished prepping a client presentation, one I'd been building for 2 weeks. I'm a digital strategy consultant, which sounds boring to most people, but I love it. Building campaigns, launching products, helping businesses grow, it's my thing. I had just hit save when the doorbell rang. When I opened it, a delivery man stood there with an ivory envelope. "For Miss Sheryl Grant," he said, smiling as he handed it over. My heart did a small leap. Fancy envelopes like that usually meant something joyful. A wedding, maybe. Or a graduation. I hadn't been invited to many of those lately. When I turned the envelope over and read the names embossed in silver, my stomach dropped. Derek Grant and Melissa Stone. My brother. My own flesh and blood. Getting married. The invitation was exquisite. Silver foil print on thick stock, with an RSVP card tucked neatly inside. I read it over and over. The wedding was set for May 17th at Rosewood Garden Estate. Ceremony at 4, reception at 6. Formal attire. Black tie optional. I blinked. I hadn't even known Derek was engaged. No calls. No announcement. No "Hey sis, guess what?" He had a fiancée, a wedding planned, and somehow, I'd only just found out via mail like a distant stranger. Still, part of me held on to hope. Maybe this was the moment things would change. Maybe they were finally ready to bring me back into the family circle. I had spent years standing just outside the frame, never quite embraced, never quite loved out loud. I called my mom later that night. She answered, voice clipped and distracted. "Oh. Sheryl." There was no warmth, not even the fake kind. "I got Derek's wedding invitation," I said softly. Silence. Then a quick, "Looks beautiful." I didn't even know he was seeing someone seriously. More silence. "Melissa's a nice girl," Mom said finally, then cleared her throat like she was in a rush to end the call. "We've all been busy. You know how it is." But I didn't. Because I hadn't been part of any of it. The planning. The excitement. The engagement. Still, I decided to show up. Maybe if I made an effort, things would be different. I bought a deep navy gown, one that hugged my shape but didn't scream for attention. I chose a pearl necklace, simple, elegant, and booked a hotel near the venue. I even ordered a custom digital portrait of Derek and Melissa based on photos I found online, had it printed on wood, and framed it myself. I told myself this was my chance to belong again. I just had to step up and be present. The day before the wedding, I stopped by Aunt Valerie's house, my mom's older sister. She lived on the edge of town and was the only family member who ever checked in on me, even if it was just a birthday text. When I arrived, I proudly showed her the framed gift. "You think they'll like it?" Aunt Valerie hesitated. Her eyes flicked to the frame, then back to me. "You put a lot of heart into it." I sat down at her kitchen table, chatting about the wedding plans, how excited I was to see everyone again. She smiled politely, but something flickered in her eyes. "What's wrong?" I asked. She opened her mouth. Closed it. Then finally said, "Nothing. I just hope you have a good time, Sheryl." The next morning, I woke up early. I put on my dress, curled my hair, and applied my favorite mauve lipstick. I even wore heels, even though I hated them. I wanted to look like someone worth remembering. I drove to Rosewood Garden Estate, the venue listed on the invite. The parking lot was empty. The gate was locked. I checked the time. I checked the date. I even pulled up the location on Google Maps. May 17th, Rosewood Garden Estate. Then I noticed something strange. The photos of the venue online didn't match the one in front of me. The landscaping was different. The archway wasn't the same. My chest started to tighten. I called the estate office. The woman who answered was cheerful. "Oh, the Grant wedding? That was last weekend. Beautiful ceremony. Weather held up perfectly." I nearly dropped my phone. Last weekend? But the invitation said today. I pulled it out of my clutch and stared at it like it might magically correct itself. But the truth had already sunk in. They had given me a fake date. My own brother. My own mother. They had sent me a wedding invitation, deliberately marked with the wrong day, so I would miss it. I drove home in silence, numb. No tears. Just a slow, hollow ache settling into my chest. Later that night, I stared at my reflection in the mirror, still in the dress I'd picked with so much hope. My mascara had smudged a little. My curls had started to fall. But I wasn't crying. I wasn't heartbroken. I was done. I opened my laptop and pulled up the shared account I'd set up 3 years ago, a quiet little maintenance fund I'd been using to pay my parents' property taxes, cover plumbing repairs, even install a new water heater last winter. I had created a fake LLC just to funnel money discreetly. They never knew it was me. They probably thought the house was just blessed by luck. I emptied the account into my personal savings. Then I closed it. For good. The night after I learned the truth, that they had faked the wedding date to exclude me, was the last night I allowed myself to feel small. I lay on my couch in silence, still in that navy gown, the framed wedding gift leaning against the hallway wall like a relic from another life. I stared at the ceiling for hours, letting the betrayal settle in my bones. But when the sun started to rise, something inside me shifted. Not a breakdown. A breakthrough. I brewed coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and made a list. A real one. No tears. No begging for understanding. Just clarity. 1. Close all financial ties. 2. Get legal documentation in place. 3. Reclaim what I've built. That morning, I called Catherine Wells, my attorney. "Sheryl," she said, voice warm but professional. "Is everything okay?" "No," I replied. "But it will be." Within an hour, I was in her office. I told her everything, from the fake invitation to the maintenance fund I'd been using to quietly prop up my parents' house for years. She listened closely, her pen scratching across the page. "You want to sever all ties?" she asked. "Yes. Financial and otherwise." She tilted her head slightly. "You've been incredibly generous." I smiled bitterly. "And invisible." Catherine nodded. "We can start with shutting down the LLC and trust account. We'll also file for a temporary no-contact order and review your legal ownership over the house." I paused. "They don't know I own it. I bought it 3 years ago when the bank was threatening foreclosure. I created a shell company to do it quietly. My mother signed the deed over without even reading the fine print." Her eyes narrowed. "Then technically, they're living in your property. No lease. No legal rights. They're squatters." I said nothing. Just sat there, letting the word echo. Squatters. That same afternoon, I shut down the anonymous grant fund. That included the property tax payments, maintenance fees, and utilities for the Orchard Street house. I had been covering all of it out of guilt. Out of hope. But not anymore. By the time I got home, I felt lighter. I put the navy dress away in the closet, not as a symbol of loss, but of freedom. A costume I wore the day I stopped needing anyone's approval. The next few days were quiet. No calls. No texts. Not even from my brother. I knew they wouldn't check in on me. To them, I probably didn't even register as a blip on their emotional radar. But the silence didn't hurt like it used to. I welcomed it. Until Catherine called. "Sheryl," she said. "We need to talk about the house." "What happened?" "Nothing, yet. But your parents have no legal claim. If we want to proceed with a formal eviction, now is the time." I didn't hesitate. "Send the notice." We arranged for a formal letter of notice to be delivered in person. Catherine would go with me, along with a sheriff's deputy, just in case. I didn't expect violence, but I'd learned to stop assuming people would treat me with decency. The day we arrived, the front lawn looked just as I remembered, overgrown, patchy. The front steps still creaked beneath our feet. It felt strange, stepping onto a porch I used to run across barefoot as a child. But I wasn't a child anymore. My father opened the door. He looked older. Smaller. Thinner than I remembered. His gray hair looked like it had lost a battle with a comb. Behind him stood my mother, arms crossed, a look of confusion twisting into suspicion. "Sheryl," she asked slowly. "What are you doing here?" Catherine stepped forward, professional as ever. "Mr. and Mrs. Grant, this is a legal notice to vacate the property within 30 days. You have no legal claim to remain here." "What?" my mother hissed. "This is our home." I met her eyes. Calm. Unshaken. "No. You sold it to my LLC 3 years ago. You were paid in full. You just never bothered to ask who owned the company." My father looked stunned. My mother's face turned scarlet. "You bought our house," she spat. "Behind our backs?" "No," I said coolly. "I saved it. You were about to lose it. I just didn't want you to be homeless." Funny how that's turning out anyway. My father stepped forward. "Sheryl, please. This isn't you." "You're right," I replied. "It's the me who finally stopped being a fool." They didn't argue much after that. I think deep down they knew they'd crossed a line they couldn't walk back from. I had offered them every chance, every silent olive branch, but they burned them all and then mocked me for standing in the ashes. When we walked away from the house, my mother shouted, "You'll regret this." I didn't turn around. Instead, I said quietly over my shoulder, "I regret nothing more than trying to belong to people who never wanted me." 3 weeks later, they were gone. No resistance. No apology. The keys arrived in a plain envelope at my office. No note. Just the cold clang of finality. I went to the house alone, walked through each room, remembering the laughter that used to echo through the halls, and the silence that later replaced it when I wasn't invited to Christmas, to birthdays, to dinner. The house smelled of lemon cleaner and faded dreams. I didn't cry. I didn't feel triumphant either. I just felt done. Later that week, I sat on my balcony, sipping jasmine tea, and watching the sun fall over the city skyline. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in years. But life had one more unexpected twist to throw at me. It came in the form of a woman named Melissa. Yes, the Melissa. Derek's new wife. The bride I never got to meet. The woman who saw me in the doorway at their house the day I confronted them and chose silence over decency. She showed up at my office. My assistant buzzed me. "There's someone downstairs. Says her name is Melissa Grant. She looks nervous. Should I send her away?" I paused, every part of me bracing. No. Send her up. What came next would change everything I thought I knew about loyalty, betrayal, and the price of silence. Melissa stepped into my office looking like someone who hadn't slept in days. Her dark brown hair was pulled into a loose bun, and her makeup, if any, was barely hanging on. She wore a simple beige trench coat and clutched her bag like it was a lifeline. For a second, I almost didn't recognize her. The last time I saw her, she was glowing in a wedding photo I was never meant to witness in real life. Now, she looked haunted. "Hi, Sheryl," she said quietly, eyes downcast. "Thank you for seeing me." I didn't respond. I gestured to the seat across from me and waited for her to explain why she was here. She sat down slowly and took a deep breath, like the words were knives she had to pull out one by one. "I owe you an apology," she began. "I should have said something that day, at the house. When you showed up." I nodded slowly. "You saw me. And you looked away." She flinched, like the memory physically hurt her. "I did. I was scared. And not of you." Her hands shook slightly as she reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She slid it across the desk. I hesitated, then picked it up. It was a printout of a rental agreement. A lease in her name, for an apartment in Edina. Signed a month ago. "I'm leaving Derek," she said. "I've already moved out." I blinked. "You, what?" Melissa looked at me then, really looked at me. And for the first time, I saw fear. Not of confrontation. But of what she'd been living through. "I didn't know who he really was," she said. "Or maybe I did, and I just didn't want to admit it. But after the wedding, he changed. He got controlling. Angry. He'd yell at me for things like using the wrong detergent or forgetting to call his mom. And when your parents had to leave the house, he snapped. Screamed at them. Called them ungrateful leeches in front of me." I raised an eyebrow. Melissa nodded. "He told them they were a burden. Said he was done cleaning up your failures." "My failures?" I echoed, voice tight. "Yes," she said softly. "He said you were always the weird one. That you brought negativity into the family. That he'd done you a favor by excluding you." I inhaled sharply. A fresh knife slid between the ribs. "I wanted to leave earlier," Melissa continued. "But I was scared. I thought staying silent would keep the peace. But it didn't. It just made me complicit." "And now?" I asked. "Now, I'm done being quiet," she said. "I filed for divorce last week." Silence settled between us, heavy and strange. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to believe her, to see this as the justice I never expected. But another part of me, wounded, wary, couldn't forget how she watched me walk into that room with no warning and still said nothing. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said, as if reading my mind. "I just wanted you to hear it from me. That you were never the problem. And I'm sorry I didn't say it sooner." She stood to leave. And just before she walked out the door, she turned back and said quietly, "You deserve to be at that wedding more than I did." The door clicked shut behind her. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel bitterness rising. Just peace. Sometimes apologies don't erase what happened. But they seal the wound just enough to stop the bleeding. I thought that was the end of it. But a week later, I got a letter. It arrived in a plain white envelope. No return address. But I recognized the handwriting instantly, crooked, leaning slightly to the left. My father. I almost threw it away. But curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a simple note. "Sheryl. I've been going to therapy. Once a week. I don't expect forgiveness, and I know I can't undo what we did. But I wanted you to know that I'm trying. Not for you to accept me. But to understand myself. I'm sorry. Dad." I stared at the paper for a long time. My hands didn't tremble. My eyes didn't tear up. I folded the letter neatly and placed it in my desk drawer. I didn't reply. Not because I hated him. But because for the first time in my life, I was in control of when, or if, that door reopened. A few days later, I walked into the office of the CEO of my firm. We had a meeting scheduled about the Q2 campaign results. But instead of the usual charts and data, he handed me a white envelope with a company seal. Sheryl, he said, smiling. You've been promoted. Congratulations, you're now creative director. I blinked. Then blinked again. Are you serious? Dead serious, he said. No one else even came close. You've carried this team through 6 product launches. It's overdue. I felt a lump rise in my throat, but this time it wasn't from sorrow. It was the strange, weightless feeling of being seen. Of being valued. Not because I begged for it. But because I earned it. That night, I went home to my new apartment near Lake Harriet. A bigger space. Clean white walls, wide windows, and a lake view that looked like a painting come to life. Aunt Valerie came by with a bottle of wine and an apple tart. To new beginnings, she toasted, raising her glass. We sat on the balcony, laughing, sharing stories, and watching the lights shimmer across the water. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was missing something. I didn't feel like an outsider. Because I finally understood, being alone doesn't mean being unloved. And sometimes the most powerful revenge is peace. The weeks that followed were the most unexpectedly calm of my adult life. There were no family texts popping up to derail my day. No half-hearted calls. No invitations I had to pretend to be excited about, only to come home in tears after being treated like background noise. It was just me, my new apartment, my new role as creative director, and the quiet kind of peace that comes from finally shutting a door that had been creaking open for years. I started waking up early. Running by the lake before the city came alive. I spent more time with Aunt Valerie, who brought her quirky art friends over and convinced me to sponsor her next gallery opening. You know, she said one evening while helping me hang a new painting in the hallway, you've always been more than enough. They just never knew how to love someone like you. I didn't respond. I just hugged her. That was all I needed to say. I was learning how to live for myself. To build a life that wasn't rooted in begging for inclusion. And for a while, I thought that was the final chapter. I thought maybe I'd hear nothing more from my family, and honestly, that was fine. But life, I've come to learn, loves to circle back. 3 months after Melissa's visit and nearly 6 months after the wedding fiasco, my phone buzzed one Monday morning as I was prepping a presentation. A message from the front desk at my office. There's a man here asking to see you. Says his name is Derek Grant. My stomach tightened. I hadn't said his name out loud in months. I walked slowly to the lobby, every part of me bracing, not for an attack, but for a manipulation. When the elevator opened, there he was. Derek. Same smug face, same perfectly styled hair, same sense of entitlement clinging to him like expensive cologne. Except this time, there was something off. Something fractured. His clothes were wrinkled. His eyes bloodshot. He looked desperate. Sheryl, he said, trying to smile. Hey. I didn't smile back. What do you want? He hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. I need to talk. Please. I crossed my arms, keeping my distance. Melissa left, he said, voice cracking slightly. Took her stuff, filed for divorce. I didn't think she'd actually go through with it. I didn't say a word. He shifted, clearly uncomfortable with the silence. Mom and Dad are staying in some motel out near Brooklyn Center. They're running out of money. I told them not to come to you. I figured I'd try instead. My eyes narrowed. Try what, exactly? He swallowed. I know things went bad. I know we hurt you. But Mom's sick. She won't admit it, but I've seen her. And Dad, he's a shell. We just need help. Just a little support. Just until we get back on our feet. Something in me flared, a mixture of disbelief and disgust. You made it perfectly clear at the wedding, well, your real wedding, that I don't fit into this family. Remember? His mouth opened, then shut. You sent me a fake invitation, Derek. You and Mom and Dad laughed while I waited outside a locked venue in a dress I picked out with hope for the first time in years. And now you want money? His eyes darkened. So you're really going to leave them on the street? That's who you are now. I stepped closer. I spent a decade offering kindness you all threw back in my face. I paid off their debts, kept the heat running, fixed the damn roof in secret just to avoid humiliating them. And you still erased me. You're being dramatic, he muttered. No, I snapped. I'm being honest. And you don't get to guilt me into pretending this family ever treated me like I mattered. He clenched his jaw. Fine. You've made your point. He turned to leave, but paused. You think success and some fancy title makes you better than us? I looked him straight in the eye. No. But knowing I don't owe you anything ever again? That makes me free. He walked away, shoulders stiff, and I let him go. I didn't watch him leave. I didn't cry. I went back upstairs, walked into my glass-walled office, and closed the door behind me. Then I picked up the photo on my desk, me and Aunt Valerie at her art show, laughing, eyes full of joy, and I smiled. That evening, I sat on my balcony again, wine in hand, wrapped in my favorite sweater as the city glowed orange beneath the setting sun. I thought of everything I'd been through, every time I was ignored, every dinner I was left out of, every birthday they forgot, every time they made me feel like I was the difficult one. I thought of my mother's mocking comments about my career, Derek's smug derision, my father's silence. And I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Not even bitter. I was finished. Finished with trying to explain myself. Finished with carrying their weight. Finished with performing the role of the dutiful daughter who accepts crumbs and calls it love. And for the first time in my life, I felt whole. They had built a family around exclusion. I was building a life around peace. And peace, I've learned, is the greatest revenge of all. The next time I heard from them, it wasn't through a letter or a phone call. It was through a lawyer. A thick white envelope arrived at my apartment 2 weeks after Derek's visit, bearing the letterhead of a family attorney I vaguely remembered from my childhood, someone my parents had used back when they tried to contest my grandmother's will. Inside was a formal request, mediation over property ownership. Specifically, the house on Orchard Street. The one I bought. The one they sold. They were claiming they hadn't understood what they were signing. That I had misrepresented myself when I purchased the property through an LLC. That my mother had believed it was temporary assistance, not a permanent transfer of ownership. They were asking for the house back. I didn't even laugh. I called Catherine, who read the letter silently, then looked at me with that icy calm that always preceded her most devastating legal work. They signed the deed. Notarized. In full compliance with Minnesota state law, she said. We have records, payment logs, and recordings of the closing. This is posturing. They're trying to bluff. Can they make it stick? Not a chance. But if you'd like, she added with a smirk, we can respond in kind. I'd like that. That same week, we filed a cease and desist and a countersuit for harassment and intentional emotional distress. We attached records of all the financial assistance I had provided, utilities, repairs, taxes, tied directly to my LLC, complete with timestamps and invoices. Every dollar accounted for. Every kindness documented. I wasn't playing nice anymore. I wasn't hiding behind silence or secrecy or polite explanations. I was done giving them anything. But that wasn't the end. One Friday afternoon, after I wrapped up a meeting with a new client in Uptown, I stopped by Aunt Valerie's place. She was painting in the sunroom, surrounded by half-finished canvases and the scent of turpentine. There she is, she said, wiping her hands on a rag. I was wondering when you'd come by. I needed air, I said. And maybe your famous honey biscuits. She laughed. Well, those I've got. As we sat in her kitchen, sipping coffee and eating warm biscuits, I told her about the legal letter. She didn't look surprised. "They're cornered," she said. "People lash out when the mask slips and they have to live with what they've done." I nodded. "Derek said Mom was sick." "He didn't say with what. But he looked broken." Valerie's eyes softened. "Maybe she is. Maybe it's regret. Or maybe it's just the absence of someone to prop her up anymore." I stayed quiet. After a long pause, Valerie reached into a drawer and pulled out something wrapped in yellowing paper. "This is for you." Inside was a faded photo of my grandmother standing in front of the Orchard Street house, holding a little girl, me, on her hip. We were both smiling, and in her eyes, I saw something I never saw in my mother's: pride. "She always said you were the spark," Valerie whispered. "Said you'd build something bigger than this family ever understood." I held the photo tightly. And for the first time, I believed her. That night, I went home and framed the photo. Placed it on my mantel beside a small vase of white lilies and a candle I lit just once a week, in quiet memory. I wasn't mourning the loss of a family. I was honoring the woman who saw me before the world tried to convince me I wasn't enough. 2 weeks later, the court dismissed my parents' claim. Catherine called me with the news. They dropped it before the hearing. Likely couldn't afford to fight. Or maybe they realized they didn't have a leg to stand on. Either way, I said they got the message. But not all messages came in envelopes. Some came quietly. That weekend, I received a small package on my doorstep. No return address. Just my name scrawled in pen. Inside was a wedding photo, one I had never seen before. My parents, Derek, and Melissa all posing in front of the altar. But someone had circled an empty space in the lineup. And written 2 words beneath it. "You mattered." No signature. Just silence. I stared at it for a long time. Was it Melissa? My father? I'd never know for sure. But I didn't need to. Because I didn't need closure anymore. I had created my own. Sometimes, the past knocks softly when it wants to be let back in. Other times, it sends you a wedding photo with an empty circle and 2 words designed to tug at the last strings you thought you'd already cut. You mattered. It haunted me, not because I doubted it, but because of the cruel irony of it arriving too late. I left the photo on my coffee table for days. I never framed it. I never threw it away either. It just stayed there, like a ghost refusing to fade completely. One rainy Thursday afternoon, I sat in my office watching storm clouds roll over Lake Harriet when Catherine called again. "They've left the state," she said without preamble. I blinked. "What?" "Your parents." I got an alert through a legal contact. The motel in Brooklyn Center kicked them out after an unpaid bill. They packed their things and drove down to Missouri. No forwarding address, no plans. It should have felt like closure. Like the final page turning. But instead, it felt like the sound of a door slamming in the wind, a reminder that even when you don't chase people away, they'll still find a way to leave you behind. Later that night, I received an email. Subject line, from Dad. It was the first time he had reached out to me directly since the letter months ago. Sheryl. I know you probably won't read this, or maybe you will and just won't respond. I don't blame you either way. I saw the eviction notice. I signed the sale papers. I know I have no legal ground. That's not why I'm writing. I just wanted to say that when we saw your car in the driveway that day, before the fake wedding date, we panicked. Your mom said you'd ruin the mood. Derek agreed. I just stayed quiet like I always did. That was my crime, Sheryl. Silence. I let you be erased, and I let them believe it was okay. But when Melissa left and Derek spiraled, I saw what we had really done. We didn't just exclude you. We built our family around rejecting the only person who never stopped giving. I don't deserve forgiveness. I don't expect it. I just needed to say this before it's too late. I still read your articles. Your name's on the bylines. I keep them. Quietly. I hope life is kind to you, even if we weren't. Dad. I read the message 3 times. Then I archived it. No response. Not because I hated him, but because some stories don't need another chapter. Some words don't require an answer. A few weeks later, I was invited to speak at a digital media summit in Chicago. Keynote slot. All expenses paid. It was the biggest platform I'd ever been offered. When I stepped onto that stage in front of hundreds of attendees, lights beaming down on me, microphone in hand, I realized just how far I'd come. I spoke about strategy, yes, but I also spoke about resilience. About building something that no one clapped for in the beginning. About walking through loneliness and not letting it define you. After the talk, a woman in the crowd stopped me. You made me cry, she said. Not because you were sad, but because you were strong. That night, in my hotel room overlooking the Chicago skyline, I finally opened the photo again. The one with the empty circle. And for the first time, I smiled. They had left that space open. But I had filled it on my own, with every sleepless night, every act of courage, every moment I chose not to give in to bitterness. That circle was no longer about what I missed. It was a placeholder for who I had become. The leaves had just begun to turn gold when I returned from the Chicago summit. Minneapolis was cooling down, autumn crisp in the air, the sidewalks dressed in amber, and the lake outside my apartment glazed with morning mist. I had spent years dreading this season, because it reminded me of all the things my family had forgotten. Birthdays. Holidays. Me. But that year, the season felt different. Not like something was ending, but like something real had finally begun. I didn't hear from Derek again. Not a call, not a message. Not even a passive-aggressive email. He had faded into the background of my story like a character whose arc had closed. I didn't care where he lived or whether he and Melissa ever spoke again. Their absence was no longer a hole, it was peace. But then came one more unexpected echo from the past. It was Aunt Valerie again. She showed up with a box in her arms, worn and taped shut like it had been dragged through half a dozen moves. This was in the attic at your parents' house, she said. They told me to toss it when they moved. But I opened it, and I couldn't. She placed it gently on my kitchen island. Then, with a sigh, she added, "It's all yours." When she left, I stared at the box for a long time before opening it. Inside were fragments. My childhood sketchbooks. A science fair ribbon. Birthday cards I had written to my mom, but that she never opened. A tiny bracelet I made for Derek when we were kids. Still wrapped in the tissue paper he never touched. And near the bottom, a VHS tape. Labeled simply, Sheryl. Age 7. I didn't even know I had a VCR anymore, but I found one in the back of my storage closet. I set it up, popped in the tape, and waited as the static cleared. There I was. 7 years old. Missing teeth, curls tied with purple ribbon, standing in front of our old fireplace holding a paper microphone. "I'm going to be a star," I said to the camera, beaming. Not a real star, my mom's voice cut in from behind the camera. "Just, make sure you learn to type. That's what you're good at." The girl on the screen blinked. Her smile dimmed. But then she raised the paper mic again. "I'm gonna shine anyway," she said, defiant. The tape crackled, then ended. I sat on the floor, tears slipping quietly down my cheeks. Not for what they did. But for how long I had been waiting for someone to believe I could shine, when all along, I already had. I didn't need their permission. I never had. A month later, I closed on my second investment property. This one in the heart of downtown, a loft space I planned to convert into a creative co-working studio for young women in digital media. A place where no one would ever be told they didn't belong. When the papers were signed, I stood on the balcony of the building, staring at the city I had grown up in. The one I had once felt invisible inside. And I whispered aloud. I see you now. Not to them. But to me. To the version of Sheryl who waited years to be chosen. Who whispered dreams in the dark and hoped someone would hear. She was heard. By me. And that was enough. On the day we opened the studio, I gave a short speech. Not about business. But about boundaries. People will ask you to shrink, I said. To get smaller so they can stay comfortable. They'll tell you you're too much, too quiet, too intense, too different. And for a while, you might believe them. But when you stop asking for space and start claiming it, everything changes. A round of applause followed, but it wasn't the noise that moved me. It was the stillness afterward. The feeling that the space I had once begged to be let into no longer mattered. Because I had built my own. And it was full of light. Sheryl's story is a powerful reminder. Sometimes the family we're born into will never see us for who we are. And that's not our failure, it's theirs. Walking away isn't weakness. It's the strongest act of self-love we can choose. You don't owe anyone access to your peace, your success, or your heart, especially if they've proven they won't treat it with care. Let go of what never saw you, so you can finally see yourself. If you found strength in Sheryl's story, share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to Revenge Echoes, where stories speak louder than revenge.